So the first proof that Descartes tried in Meditation 3 was based on the cause and effect relationship between ideas and their sources. And this one, yeah, maybe you buy it, but it seems a little shaky. And Descartes recognizes that it seems a little shaky because in Meditation 5 he's going to try a second proof. He'll do some other discussions before he gets into the meat of the proof. But that's really the point of the meditation, because he really, remember, wants to take this shortcut to prove that God exists, and because God is powerful enough to stop an evil demon and benevolent enough that he wouldn't want Descartes to be deceived, then if he can prove that God exists, then he can trust his clear and distinct perceptions, he can trust most of his sense perceptions and thoughts and all of that good stuff. He's going to start off by talking about triangles, and we'll see why this is relevant very shortly. So he thinks about triangles, and he says, in a sense, it doesn't matter if I made them up or not. Even if there are no real triangles, and this is actually a plausible thing to say, right, because we know that triangles, there are no actual perfect triangles in the world, right? There are really close ones, but, you know, a Euclidean perfect geometric triangle doesn't exist. But even though there aren't any in the world, right, we still know they have properties, like that all the angles add up to 180 degrees. So we can generalize from this, and we can say that for any idea that we have, those ideas entail various properties that the ideas possess. So if we have an idea about triangles, right, I know it's a three-sided closed geometrical figure with all straight lines, blah, 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 we know that just having that idea entails all of the necessary properties of being a triangle. So if some triangle exists, then it must have all angles that add to 180 degrees, even if there aren't any triangles in the world. If there were one, this would have to be true. So what's the point? Why are we talking about geometry? Well, we know Descartes is a mathematician, but this is not the point. He wants to compare God to a triangle, sort of. So from this principle, Descartes thinks he can talk about God's existence again, based on the idea that he has of God, right? Remember, all he knows so far for sure is that he's a thinking thing and he has a whole bunch of ideas in his head, in his mind. And so he has the idea of God, and he wants to go from this idea to proving that God actually exists. Well, whatever properties the idea of God entails, God, if he exists, must have those properties. Now here's where the really tricky move Descartes wants to make comes in. He's going to say that if you think back to triangles, right, we know that if a triangle exists, then it must have certain properties. Well, Descartes is going to say that God is a little bit different because God necessarily exists. There's no way to have an idea of God without him existing. He's going to say it's logically impossible, given the properties that we've already agreed that the Catholic God has, that he could exist. And so here's why. We know that Descartes thinks that God has various properties, right? And they're all these things that he calls perfections. So, God has, we know, perfect knowledge, perfect goodness, perfect power. Basically, God is as perfect as it gets. And so, we know that Descartes wants to ask a fairly simple question. What's more perfect, existing or not existing? And I'm sorry, I've cut off part of my words with my chart here, but bear with me. I'll explain our way through. So imagine two possible gods, right? And this is, again, slightly blasphemous, and Descartes wouldn't really want to put it this way, but I think this is a good way to make it work. So God A is perfect in every way, but doesn't exist. So, you know, that's a problem. God B is perfect in every way, perfectly intelligent, good, and powerful, and also exists. And so the question that Descartes sort of suggests that we ask is, well, which God is better? Which one's more perfect? And he says, well, obviously it's God B, because God B actually exists. It seems way more perfect to exist than not to exist. So you're sort of flawed if you don't exist. So he's going to say, famously, that God's essence is existence. B is more perfect because God B actually exists, and it seems wrong to call a God that doesn't exist perfect. We know then, supposedly, that by definition, God must be absolutely perfect in every way, following the sort of basic Catholic theology. And since God is perfect in every way, and existence is a way to be perfect, then one must exist. So because God is perfect in every way, God must exist. If he didn't exist, he wouldn't be perfect. He would violate the own definition of what he is. This is maybe plausible, you might think. You also might think that this doesn't work based on a famous objection called the perfect island objection. So we'll talk about this and some implications in our final video for the week.